as it were, a great mountain was cast into the sea.
In the second trumpet judgment, it talks about a great mountain falling into the ocean. That could be an asteroid, but it uses the term mountain, and then it uses the term fire. A mountain bursting out of the ocean, erupting with fire.
It's one of the most dangerous and destructive forces on Earth. Could one of the 7 signs be a volcano? A look back at ancient history provides a clue. The images of fire and brimstone that define hell were inspired by the flaming magma and sulfuric gas emitted by volcanoes. Like many violent natural events, volcanic eruptions are seen by our Christian ancestors as the result of God's wrath. Mount Vesuvius erupts in 79 AD. During the same period, John of Patmos writes the book of Revelation. The eruption buries the Roman city of Pompeii. Hot volcanic ash entombs thousands of victims for all time, frozen in their final agony. Many early Christians view this as God's punishment of the pagan Roman Empire, exacted for persecuting their Christian brethren.
A volcanic eruption is an indication that God is in control of the earth, that He is the one who controls these natural phenomena.
We know too well the power of volcanoes today. Mount St. Helens in 1980, Mount Pinatubo in 1991. These eruptions and countless others have caused humans pain and suffering on an immense scale. But for a volcanic eruption to be recognized today as among the 7 signs, it will have to be of unprecedented size and destructiveness.
The result of this great mountain-like object falling into the ocean is destroying life on planet Earth.
Are there, in fact, volcanoes large enough to cause such an apocalypse? Science now confirms that there are. And just as the prophecy describes, they can be hidden in oceans or even right below us. It's a phenomenon called supervolcanoes.
A supervolcano is any volcano that emits 100 cubic kilometers or more of ash in a single eruption.
That's about 100 to 150 times more than Mount St. Helens ejected in 1980. And there are supervolcanoes scattered across the globe.
Taupo in New Zealand, a popular fishing resort on the North Island. Santorini in the Aegean. The Campi Flegrei, just west of Naples, where several 100,000 people live.
There are at least 8 supervolcanoes around the world. But they're hard to find, since they usually don't take the form of a mountain.
Most volcanoes, when they erupt explosively, leave a crater, a violent expulsion of magma that blows its roof off. When a very large eruption occurs, it leaves something called a caldera, which is a much more structured, bowl-shaped depression that has relatively steep walls. It's typically tens of kilometers across, and it forms by a settling of the roof rocks down into what used to be the magma chamber.
There are several supervolcano calderas within the United States. One of the most beautiful sights may also pose the greatest threat of devastation.
Yellowstone is a large volcanic crater measuring 35 by 45 miles.
It's just shocking to imagine a single eruption that would evacuate so much magma and create a valley where there was nothing.
But that's exactly what happened at Yellowstone. More than once.
Yellowstone has had 3 very big eruptions that were hundreds of cubic kilometers or more. The most recent of them happened 640,000 years ago.
We know that Yellowstone has erupted in the past. We know it could erupt again in the future. The question is when.
Yellowstone Plateau is rising at a rate of about 6/10 of an inch, a little bit more than half an inch a year. This is a product of molten rock beneath that plateau. We just don't have enough data to say what the probability is of this culminating in a big eruption.
The data scientists do have indicates that an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano isn't likely, at least not for a few thousand years. But scientific data doesn't sway true believers in the 7 signs prophecy.
When it comes to science and the scripture, I have never seen anything, when you really examine it, that science can disprove the scripture.
However, believers examining the prophecy and scientists investigating the data do agree on one thing. If a supervolcano does erupt, our prospects will be bleak.
The first thing that would happen would be a series of minor eruptions. They don't erupt simultaneously around the entire circumference of the caldera. Instead, they punch a single hole through the edge of the caldera, and then they unzip the caldera rim by migrating that eruption center around its circumference.
Once this happens, the entire floor of the Yellowstone caldera will collapse. That will blast a gigantic column of scalding volcanic gas and ash up to 20 kilometers high into the atmosphere.
That cloud collapses in places and produces a ground-hugging mass of hot ash that runs perhaps several hundred miles down river valleys.
Anyone and anything within that range would almost certainly be buried and killed.
As we've learned from many previous eruptions, the victims suffer a terrible death.
What kills people is the ingestion of hot gases that cook you from the inside.
The ash that remains airborne is carried westward by the prevailing winds.
11 western states, including a substantial part of California, become blanketed in ash. You're looking at a destruction of the grain belt in the Midwest, upon which a substantial part of the world's population living at margin depends. And with that, then, a realignment of the geopolitical balance of power.
Long-term damage could be even worse. Small volcanic particles and gases continue to circulate in the stratosphere, causing sunlight to reflect away from Earth. Volcanic winter sets in, very much like the impact winter caused by a large asteroid impact. Global temperatures drop as far as 5 degrees centigrade. That may not sound like much, but that's the only temperature difference that separates us from the last ice age.
Once these horrific events begin to unfold, certainly students of the Bible will recognize them immediately as events that were foretold thousands of years ago that are now coming to pass.
In contrast to the unshakable beliefs of devout Christians, scientists are not as sure of the future.
Supervolcanic eruptions could take place at several dozen localities around the world.
The best that we can do is, if we notice evidence that a major eruption is impending, to clear out the surrounding area and prepare for the possible consequences.
Not very reassuring. One more mystery explored, but still more questions to answer. The next sign is even more mysterious than volcanoes, but every bit as powerful. It's a phenomena that turns the very waters we depend on as red as human blood.